The Pentagon has spent decades building the world's most sophisticated surveillance empire, but something is happening right now in Africa that keeps its generals awake at night. For the first time, an entire continent is seriously building its own sovereign internet, free from Western backbones, undersea cable control, and U.S. tech monopolies. This is not just about faster connections or cheaper data plans. This is about independence, power, and the future of how the world communicates without asking permission from Washington, London, or Silicon Valley. Imagine the shockwaves this sends through the corridors of the Pentagon, the NSA, and the CIA, where African data has always been seen as open ground for harvesting. Now, with sovereign internet projects gaining momentum, that era of unchallenged access is slipping away. To understand why this is such a big deal, you have to look at the digital history of Africa. For decades, African nations were plugged into the internet through undersea cables, owned, operated, or monitored by Western companies. The very architecture of connectivity placed African traffic through foreign data centers, often routing even local communications through Europe before bouncing back. This setup wasn't an accident. It was the digital echo of colonial legacies, where infrastructure was designed to benefit outside powers first, leaving local nations dependent and vulnerable. Every email, bank transaction, and government file could pass through servers outside African control, where surveillance agencies could easily tap in. For ordinary people, this meant high costs, slow speeds, and unreliable access. But for governments, it represented something much more dangerous, a national security nightmare. How do you build a modern economy when your lifeline to the digital world can be switched off or monitored by someone else? This question fueled the first sparks of defiance. Over the last decade, several African leaders began openly calling for digital sovereignty. They argued that just like oil, diamonds, or gold, data was a national resource that must be protected and controlled at home. Nigeria spoke of hosting more local internet exchange points. South Africa invested in domestic cloud infrastructure. Kenya launched initiatives to build homegrown platforms for mobile money and e-commerce. Each of these efforts, though small at first, hinted at a larger awakening. What if Africa could design its own internet model? One that didn't rely on outside powers to stay alive. This vision is now evolving into a blueprint for a sovereign African internet. Unlike the simple network diagrams we're used to seeing, this new system is multi-layered and highly sophisticated. It begins at the bottom, with subsea cables landing directly in African-controlled hubs, rather than routing through foreign-owned facilities. From there, terrestrial fiber networks connect landlocked nations with redundancy, ensuring that no single country controls a choke point. But the real game changer is above the ground. Satellites launched by African partners, sometimes with the help of emerging allies like China or private African companies, promise global coverage without needing Western-owned infrastructure. In some regions, even high-altitude drones and balloons are being tested to extend connectivity to rural areas. On top of this hardware sits a new software layer built around advanced encryption, distributed ledger technology, and artificial intelligence. By integrating blockchain, Africa can secure transactions and government records against tampering. AI systems monitor traffic for cyber threats and optimize routing for speed and resilience. The architecture is designed not only to connect, but to protect. Key players are stepping into the spotlight. Rwanda, long seen as a digital pioneer, is experimenting with national data centers that host everything from healthcare records to financial systems. Ethiopia is pushing to localize its entire digital economy. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, is courting private sector innovators who see the profit potential in building Africa-first platforms. Across the continent, collaborations are forming between governments, universities, and tech startups determined to seize this moment. And here is where the Pentagon begins to worry. For decades, U.S. intelligence agencies relied on the fact that African data flowed through Western-owned networks. This meant the NSA could legally or illegally intercept traffic in bulk. It meant intelligence sharing with allies like Britain or France was seamless. It meant Africa's digital soul was an open book. A sovereign African internet cuts off that access. It raises new walls, encrypts new doors, and builds new locks. For the Pentagon, this is a nightmare scenario because it represents the collapse of digital dominance. It's no longer possible to surveil entire populations with a few taps on transatlantic cables. Instead, Africa will control its own backdoors, keys, and gates. That changes everything. Economically, the implications are massive. Right now, African internet traffic often travels thousands of miles unnecessarily, costing billions in inefficiencies. A sovereign network localizes that traffic, keeping money and value inside the continent. This fuels intra-African trade, one of the key goals of the African Continental Free Trade Area. It also reduces reliance on foreign cloud giants like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, whose servers dominate today. With local data centers and homegrown platforms, African businesses gain independence and resilience. New alliances form when nations realize they can trade data, digital services, and innovations directly with each other. This isn't just economic growth, it's economic liberation. The global implications are clear. We are entering an age of the splinternet, where the dream of one universal web is replaced by regional sovereign networks. China already built its Great Firewall and national internet model. Russia developed its RUNET system for emergencies. Now Africa is carving its own path, not as a copy of China or Russia, but as an original framework suited to its unique needs. Western powers fear this fragmentation because it means losing control. The Pentagon cannot surveil what it cannot reach. The State Department cannot dictate policies when nations control their own pipelines. Big tech cannot monopolize markets when local competitors rise. But the road ahead is not smooth. Building sovereign internet infrastructure is one thing. Defending it is another. Cybersecurity is now the front line of global conflict. As Africa strengthens its networks, rival powers will attempt to breach them. We can expect a digital arms race, where hackers, spies, and cyber warriors target African systems to test their defenses. For African nations, this means constant vigilance and investment in cybersecurity talent. But there is also an internal struggle. Who controls a sovereign internet? If governments hold too much power, there is a risk of censorship, surveillance, and authoritarian overreach. If the balance tips too far, the same tool that frees Africa from foreign control could enslave its people under local strongmen. Finding that balance between national security and personal freedom will be one of the continent's greatest challenges. And then there is the question of funding. Building cables, satellites, and data centers costs billions. Not every African nation has the resources. Some will depend on loans, partnerships, or alliances that may come with strings attached. Sustainability is key. If the sovereign internet is to succeed, it must be self-sustaining, not another foreign dependency disguised as independence. Despite these challenges, the momentum is undeniable. The future of connectivity may not be decided in Silicon Valley or Washington anymore. It may be decided in Lagos, Kigali, or Addis Ababa. Africa is on the path to becoming a digital superpower. This doesn't mean it will dominate the world tomorrow, but it does mean Africa will play a decisive role in shaping the rules of the next internet. By building its own networks, Africa can influence global internet governance, encryption standards, and innovation pathways. Already, African engineers are pioneering mobile-first solutions, decentralized financial systems, and community-driven connectivity models. These are not copies of Western systems, but unique creations born from necessity. And necessity has always been the mother of invention. The question now is whether the rest of the world will follow. If Africa succeeds in establishing a sovereign internet, other regions may be inspired to do the same. Latin America, Southeast Asia, and even parts of Europe may decide they no longer want to depend entirely on American or Chinese infrastructure. This would mark the beginning of a new era, a multipolar internet world. For everyday people, this silent revolution matters more than they realize. It affects privacy, cost, and freedom of choice online. It determines whether your data belongs to you, your nation, or a foreign corporation. And it decides whether the Pentagon can see what you do online, or whether that door is finally closed. The age of African digital sovereignty is here. And the world will never be the same again, because when a continent of over 1 billion people rewrites the rules of the internet, even the Pentagon has to stop, listen, and rethink its strategy.